blurry photograph, a torn jacket, and a piece of paper sealed in a drifting bottle. That's all that remained after the fog swallowed 4 friends one night, turning them into the greatest mystery to haunt Georgia's coast for nearly 3 decades. They were 4 friends who grew up together in the suburbs of Atlanta. They shared dreams, shared their youth, and on the final night before stepping into adulthood, they chose to camp along a desolate stretch of beach where the old Greenwater Lighthouse had stood dark for years. On the night of July 15, 1995, they left their campsite and stepped into the thick fog enveloping the lighthouse after midnight. Their phone signals went silent. Rain began to pour. Waves crashed relentlessly, yet there was no sign they'd been swept away. By morning, their camp was perfectly intact, their car still parked near the lighthouse trailhead, but they, Jamal, Keisha, Deshaun, Latoya had vanished. Their campsite looked as if it had been abandoned in a rush, backpacks propped next to the tent, a dead campfire, half-eaten food, footprints leading from the camp to the lighthouse, stopping abruptly at the base of the rusted spiral stairs. No one heard cries for help. No one saw them leave. Only the roar of the waves and the moaning wind swirling through the lighthouse floors remained, as if the tower itself had kept the night's secret 28 years later. A massive storm slammed Georgia's coast, toppling ancient trees and causing landslides around Greenwater Lighthouse, in the wreckage. Strange clues emerged: a shattered waterproof camera, a neon yellow windbreaker snagged on a rocky ledge, a flashlight engraved with a name lying in an old cellar unearthed by the storm, and finally, a trembling piece of paper bearing a timestamp down to the minute, sealed inside an antique glass bottle like a desperate cry for help sent far too late. Why were only these scattered artifacts left behind? Who else was with them that night? And did the ocean truly have the power to wash away every trace? Or is there another secret buried deep beneath the lighthouse, keeping the truth hidden? Jamal Thomas, 22 years old, was always the one leading the group on their adventures. Born into a working-class family in Atlanta, he inherited a deep love for exploring the outdoors from his father at a young age. Jamal was fascinated not only by ancient rock layers and strange geological formations, but also by the stories behind desolate places, especially those shrouded in mystery. It was Jamal who came up with the idea for the camping trip to the remote beach next to the long-abandoned Greenwater Lighthouse. He prepared detailed maps, studied the tides, and checked weather forecasts meticulously. His friends trusted him completely, because Jamal was always calm, logical, and attentive to every little detail the night before they left. He texted everyone, reminding them to check their phone batteries, pack waterproof jackets, and bring backup flashlights. For Jamal, this trip wasn't just an adventure, it was a sweet farewell to their college years before stepping into adulthood. Keisha Williams, 21, a graphic design student, was the lively spirit who kept everyone laughing. She grew up in the same neighborhood as Jamal, and the two were like siblings, able to understand each other with just a glance. Keisha loved the ocean and adored how the colors shifted as the sun set on the horizon. In her sketches, she often captured lonely lighthouses shining over dark waters. Keisha once said that Greenwater Lighthouse had a wild, ancient beauty she wanted to see with her own eyes before starting her new job at a major design firm in Atlanta. Her passion for art made her see the world in vivid colors, but it also made her sensitive and easily unsettled by mysteries without answers. It was Keisha who suggested filming or taking a group photo in front of the lighthouse to mark this final trip together. Deshaun Carter, 23, was the quietest of the group, more of a listener than a talker. He was interning at an electrical equipment company in Atlanta, dreaming of becoming an engineer to support his family. Deshaun came from a family of modest means and learned to be independent early, taking on part-time jobs. His friends cherished his steady, honest nature and his unexpectedly funny sense of humor. He rarely laughed loudly, but his soft, well-timed jokes could set the whole group off in fits of laughter. On the trip, Deshaun took charge of checking the car, making sure all electronic gear worked, and helping set up camp. The night before leaving Atlanta, he spent hours testing an old walkie-talkie. Even though he doubted there'd be any signal out on the secluded beach, Deshaun wasn't one to believe in the supernatural, always trying to find logical explanations. but he was the first to show unease when the thick fog began to roll in around the lighthouse on the night they disappeared. LaToya Brown, 22, was the one who made everyone feel safe even when things seemed to go wrong. She worked part-time at a small cafe and was quick, resourceful, and always ready to stand up for her friends. LaToya was a natural peacemaker when tensions rose, an attentive listener, and someone who never hesitated to encourage others. Growing up in a large family, she understood the value of friendship, trust, and the simple joy of being with loved ones the night before they set off. LaToya was the last to send a message in the group chat tomorrow. Well, make memories to last a lifetime. Her optimism kept the group's spirits high, even when unexpected rain poured down just as they finished setting up camp. They came from a close-knit community that wasn't wealthy, but was rich in love. Neighbors, teachers, and classmates all saw them as promising young adults. When news of their disappearance spread, parents of the friends gathered at Jamal's home, waiting desperately for any word. Everyone knew this group loved nature, but would never take reckless risks. When police reported the camp intact, but found no trace of the four, the entire neighborhood fell into a quiet grief, like a funeral without bodies. Friends, former teachers, and neighbors rushed to Greenwater Beach to join the volunteer search. Praying for a miracle, local authorities initially coordinated extensive efforts, deploying helicopters, search dogs, and patrol boats along the shoreline. But 3 straight days of heavy rain washed away most of the footprints, raised sea levels, and erased nearly every clue at the campsite. When the skies finally cleared, the camp still stood. Frozen like a photograph of their last moments, the fire fully extinguished, backpacks neatly arranged, a jacket hanging on a clothesline, footprints leading toward the lighthouse and vanishing abruptly. No one understood why they left everything tidy, yet never returned to their car, which was just 500 meters away. This led some to speculate the group chose to disappear, but their families vehemently rejected the idea, knowing their children had no reason to run away. In the first days of the search, parents and local residents built a temporary shelter near the camp, keeping a fire burning through the night to hold onto hope. They took turns standing watch, afraid the friends might return in the dark and need help immediately. Many refused to leave the area for a week. Among them was Keisha's mother, who stood before the lighthouse every day, staring up at its highest floor as if willing her daughter's silhouette to appear. No one could forget the hollow look in her eyes each morning as the fog enveloped the lighthouse, hiding its upper levels from view. Unspoken cries for help seemed to echo in the ocean wind, adding a heavy, sorrowful air to the place. Their small Atlanta community remained patient. Each year on July 15th, they held a memorial on the beach, lighting candles and sharing stories of Jamal, Keisha, Deshawn, and LaToya. Even without evidence they were alive and with no bodies ever found, the families continued to speak of them in the present tense, as if they were only temporarily away, for nearly 3 decades. The parents refused to sell their homes or move out of the neighborhood, keeping their children's rooms untouched, hoping one day the door would open and they'd return. The story of the missing friends became part of the community's collective memory, retold to younger generations as a reminder of nature's beauty and unforgiving power, and of a friendship that never fades, even when separated by an invisible distance. On July 15, 1995, the group set out at 4 p.m., driving a green minivan from their neighborhood in South Atlanta toward Greenwater Beach. The trip took nearly 4 hours, and they arrived at the campsite just as dusk settled in. Fog had already begun to roll in from the ocean, cloaking the long, dark lighthouse in a ghostly shroud. They pitched their tents on a sloping stretch of sand. Only about 500 meters from the base of the lighthouse, gusts from the sea whipped damp air through their hair, matting it down. But instead of fear, the friends burst into laughter as they gathered around the crackling campfire, warming their hands in the flickering light while waves pounded the shore. That night, none of them knew it would be the last time they were ever seen. They cooked a simple dinner of sausages, bread, and potatoes roasted over the coals. The waterproof camera came out, and Jamal snapped photos of the group sitting close together, Keisha striking playful poses, LaToya beaming brightly, Deshawn flashing a peace sign. No one noticed at the time, but in the final photo, a faint shadow appeared near the rocks at the base of the lighthouse. Only when the film was found years later did that image send chills down everyone's spine. Around 11 p.m., Keisha sent her last message to a friend back in Atlanta. "It's hauntingly beautiful here. Thick fog, lighthouse dark. Sounds like something out on the water." After that, no more signals came through. That night, a sudden squall swept through the coast, winds howling against the tents as rain poured in sheets. Waves crashed against the shore with a roar like thunder, yet the campsite sat high on the dunes. Outside the reach of rising waves, residents living 57 kilometers away reported hearing thunder, but no one heard screams or calls for help. It was as if the fog and rain had swallowed the night whole, isolating the friends on a tiny island in the vast, stormy darkness. At dawn on July 16th, the sky was gray. The sea still churned lightly, but the rain had stopped. Jamal's family were the first to call, but no one answered. By 9 a.m., they tried every number in the group, each one ringing into a hopeless silence. By midday, with no word, friends and parents decided to drive to the beach themselves, planning to bring the kids home. By 4 p.m., they reached the parking area off the trail leading to the beach and found the minivan still there. Window cracked slightly, seats neat. Latoya's phone still plugged in and charging. There were no signs of forced entry or damage, only deepening their dread. They hurried down the trail to the campsite and found a scene like a dream frozen in time. 2 tents pitched side by side. The campfire extinguished but still faintly warm in the ashes. Uneaten food in thermal containers. Backpacks lined up neatly. Jackets hanging damp on a clothesline from the night's rain. Nothing was disturbed, no signs of a struggle, no drag marks. But one chilling detail stood out: 4 sets of footprints, clearly etched in the morning mist, leading straight to the lighthouse and vanishing abruptly at the first floor's staircase. There were no prints returning to the tents, nor any marks suggesting a fall near the shore. Local police arrived that same afternoon, cordoned off the campsite, and began a systematic search of the lighthouse. Greenwater Lighthouse was already decaying, each wooden step groaning ominously, narrow hallways cold and dank. They combed the first 4 floors but found only cobwebs, dried seaweed, and thick dust. On the 5th floor, the lantern room, a broken window opened toward the ocean. Its rusted iron door swung loose on its hinges, creaking in the wind. But there was no evidence the friends had ever been there. While scouring the area around the lighthouse, officers discovered a neon yellow windbreaker caught on a rocky outcrop 200 meters north of the tower. The jacket was torn along the side, as if yanked forcefully, its hem still gritty with sand and strands of seaweed. Below the rocks lay deep water, but divers found no bodies or further clues. That day, curious locals began gathering along the beach, rumors swirling instantly. Some said the friends were swept away by waves. Others whispered someone had been waiting at the lighthouse, but no one had proof. In the following days, police coordinated with search and rescue teams, bringing in dogs once more. Patrol boats scanning dozens of nautical miles along the coast. Helicopters flew overhead, but the rains had washed away nearly every trace. The search lasted 8 days, with hope fading a little more each day. On the 9th day, officials announced a scaling back of operations. A small press conference was held near the parking lot by the trail, where a police spokesperson read a statement. At this time, there are no indications whether the 4 victims are alive or deceased. The search will be suspended until new leads emerge. When a reporter asked, "Is it possible they left voluntarily?" the spokesperson paused for a moment before answering, "We cannot rule out any possibility." That single sentence enraged the families and the community. Everyone knew none of the friends had any reason to run away and certainly wouldn't have left behind their camp, car, and phones. Even so, news reports began speculating that the group had disappeared by choice. The families were forced to hold their own press conference to declare firmly, "Our children did not leave on their own. They vanished, and we will not stop searching." The official end of the search left a gaping void in the hearts of the families and the community, but they refused to give up. Parents, relatives, and dozens of volunteers took turns camping near the site of the disappearance for weeks afterward. They divided up stretches of coastline, combed through the coastal woods, and even hired civilian divers to scour the water-filled crevices around the lighthouse's base. During one of these searches, more than 2 weeks after the friends vanished, an uncle of Deshawn stumbled upon a waterproof camera wedged between two rocks about 300 meters from the campsite. The camera's casing was cracked, its body battered, but the film inside remained intact. When the film was developed, it revealed a series of joyful snapshots, the friends laughing by the fire, teasing one another, captured in carefree moments. But the final frame left everyone frozen on the far right side of the image. Faint and blurred in the dense fog, stood a human figure near the rocks by the lighthouse's base. The figure was motionless, their face indiscernible. The families were stunned. None of the friends owned a long black coat like the one the person in the photo wore, and no other visitors were reported in the area that night. The picture stood as the only hint that the four hadn't been alone by the lighthouse on their last night. Police took the film and reopened the case, but after several weeks of investigation, they were unable to identify the person in the photograph. The image was deemed too unclear to serve as reliable evidence, and no new DNA or physical clues were found in the surrounding area. The one promising lead faded into a dead end. The photograph was returned to Jamal's family, who kept it as a keepsake. While word of the figure in the lighthouse fog spread through the community, turning the disappearance into a chilling legend whispered whenever someone spoke of Greenwater. 2 months later, a volunteer team continuing their search near the lighthouse discovered a neon yellow windbreaker jammed into a rock crevice on a northern outcrop, roughly 200 meters from the lighthouse. It was Keisha's, easily recognizable by the reflective patch she'd sewn on. The jacket was torn from the collar to the waist, covered in sand, dried seaweed, and strands of long black hair that DNA testing confirmed belonged to Keisha. What baffled everyone was the jacket's location perched at a height unlikely to be reached by waves, especially since tide records showed the water never rose that high on the night they disappeared. The theory of the jacket washing up there grew unlikely, replaced by suspicions that someone had placed it there, or that Keisha herself had reached that spot. When police expanded their search around the rocks, they found no other clues, no slide marks, blood, or fresh footprints. They couldn't determine who last touched the jacket. The unusual tears and the way the coat was stuck in such an inaccessible place only deepened the community's unease. Keisha's family was devastated by the discovery, but it at least confirmed she had been near the rocky outcrop. Meanwhile, investigators began considering the possibility that the four had been coerced, lured, or abducted, but no suspicious individuals were reported, and no unfamiliar vehicles appeared within 5 kilometers of the area that night. Making the theory seem increasingly elusive, the press began covering every twist, seizing on strange details to weave sensational stories, some speculating the four had been taken by supernatural forces. This only added to the family's anguish as they struggled not only with their loss, but also with dispelling harmful rumors. Even so, the local community never stopped organizing meetings, putting up missing person posters throughout the coastal area and across Atlanta, clinging to the faint hope that someone might have seen the friends 4 years after the disappearance. A massive storm slammed into the Greenwater area, causing landslides around the lighthouse while surveying the damage. A park ranger discovered a small tunnel exposed at the base of the cliff beneath the lighthouse. Previously sealed off by a large boulder, the tunnel stretched about 20 meters, pitch black, its floor littered with dried seaweed and sand, ending in a narrow chamber only a few square meters wide. There, lying neatly on the dry sand, was a headlamp with dead batteries, the strap embroidered with Keisha's name in green thread. The lamp was undisturbed, showing no signs of having been swept or shifted by water, remaining perfectly in place for 4 years. The discovery of the tunnel raised pressing questions for investigators. Had the four been forced inside, or had someone planted the item there to mislead the search? But, as before, there were no bodies, no new DNA, and no traces of violence. The investigation stalled once again, leaving families and the community suspended between hope and despair. They didn't know whether to believe their children were gone forever or somehow still out there, waiting to be found. At each annual memorial, eyes turned toward the fog-shrouded lighthouse, as if willing the four young friends to step from the mist, smiling, back into their lives. Nearly 2 decades after the disappearance, the case of the missing friends had faded from the public's memory, but their families never stopped hoping. Each year, a memorial continued to be held at Greenwater Beach, where flickering candles in the sea breeze became an unforgettable sight for anyone who witnessed them. During that time, the Greenwater Lighthouse deteriorated badly, its foundation eroded by relentless waves and storms battering the coast. At the end of 2023, the most powerful storm in 3 decades slammed into Georgia's shoreline, sending waves over 10 meters high that swallowed the area around the lighthouse for 3 days straight. When the storm passed, damage assessment teams discovered that the rocks surrounding the lighthouse's base had been deeply gouged out, revealing sections of the ground never seen before. During the survey, 2 park rangers spotted something faintly reflecting light from within the freshly exposed mud and sand, an old glass bottle, its neck tinted green, buried deep but still sealed with a cork. Inside, they found a small slip of paper, the writing blurred but still clearly legible, 2:17 a.m., 7/16/1995. No other words, just the precise time, down to the minute, like a desperate, silent cry for help, trapped for nearly 30 years. The timestamp perfectly matched the night the friends vanished. Ink analysis revealed it came from a popular 1990s pen, long out of production. Residue testing showed it was the same type Jamal often used, which his mother confirmed when police questioned her. Investigators immediately reopened the case, probing the possibility that someone had dropped the paper in the bottle and placed it where only a severe landslide could reveal it decades later. They wondered if one of the friends survived a few hours longer. Had they tried to signal for help this way but failed, or had someone else left the note, a silent message to others? Confirming they'd intervened in the group's fate, news of the discovery quickly reignited public interest, sweeping the families of Jamal, Keisha, Deshawn, and LaToya back into a whirlwind of media attention, torn between hope and terror. They questioned whether one of the 4 had clung to life long enough to write the note, or if they had all been trapped somewhere, with one of them making a desperate but futile plea. The lighthouse became a focal point once more, drawing hundreds to Greenwater Beach bearing candles, flowers, and prayers. People stood silent beneath the lighthouse's long shadow, listening to the pounding surf as if it carried the echoes of 3 decades of unanswered questions. Police joined forces with geological experts, scouring the rocky shoreline, underground tunnels, and old drainage systems beneath the lighthouse. They discovered an iron drainage pipe extending from the lighthouse's ground floor, straight out to sea, more than 30 meters long and just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Inside the pipe, they found remnants of torn fabric matching the material of the friends' jackets, though too degraded for DNA testing. The find suggested someone might have forced the friends through the pipe to spirit them away from the lighthouse, or that the friends themselves had tried to escape through it in vain. Scratches along the pipe's walls convinced investigators that at least one person had moved through the tunnel, but they couldn't determine if it was a victim or a perpetrator. The possibility that the friends were split up or corralled into captivity before vanishing took on chilling weight for the families. The thought that their children might have been held against their will terrified, injured, or worse, reopened old wounds. They had once hoped their children were at peace if they had died, but this evidence suggested they could have suffered unimaginable fear before disappearing forever, alongside their investigation. Police discreetly reviewed records of anyone present near the beach that stormy night. They identified a potential witness, an elderly fisherman who had anchored his boat in a small cove over a mile from the lighthouse to ride out the storm. He recalled that around midnight, as winds picked up, he saw a beam of light moving erratically across the upper floors of the lighthouse, even though the lighthouse had long been disconnected from power and its beacon couldn't have spontaneously come on. The light he saw was narrow and darted back and forth, nothing like the rotating beam of a functioning lighthouse, when shown a photo of the headlamp found 4 years earlier. The fisherman immediately recognized the distinct, concentrated light, confirming it matched what he'd seen that night. His account corroborated that someone was inside the lighthouse around 2 a.m., lining up exactly with the timestamp on the paper in the bottle. But what haunted everyone more was the fisherman's hesitant addition after the light abruptly vanished. He heard a faint, broken scream carried on the wind from the direction of the lighthouse, then cut off. No one could verify if that scream came from one of the friends. But for their families, the detail felt like confirmation that their children hadn't simply disappeared quietly. They had fought. They had called out. They had despaired in the darkness and storm. After the discovery of new clues, especially the note in the bottle and the fisherman's account, police delved back into the old case files. They unearthed several suspicious details that had been overlooked during the first week after the friends vanished. For instance, an initial report documented larger footprints with thick-soled shoes near the lighthouse base, mismatched with the footwear sizes of the 4 young friends. This note was crossed out in the final report, dismissed as likely belonging to rescue personnel. But when investigators checked the timeline, the footprints had been made before the site was officially secured by police, hinting that an unknown person had been near the camp or inside the lighthouse the night the friends disappeared. At the same time, detectives focused on a critical piece of information right next to the coastal nature preserve where the group camped. There was an old warehouse complex that had belonged to a local fishing company. Abandoned since the early 1990s, this site had a private access point to the ocean, easily allowing someone to move people or supplies to a boat without attracting attention. Terrain analysts concluded that if someone intended to take the friends from the beach without leaving traces, this route would have been ideal. Yet, when police searched the warehouse nearly 30 years later, it had crumbled to cracked concrete slabs, offering no viable evidence. The existence of the abandoned facility and the unidentified footprints fueled doubts, not only among the families, but also the wider community, who began questioning the integrity of the original investigation. They asked whether someone had deliberately covered up key details or whether incompetence had allowed crucial early opportunities to slip away during the critical first 72 hours. Growing anger surfaced as more families shared stories of having their own missing loved ones neglected, especially when the victims were people of color in rural areas. The case became a symbol of long-standing injustice, with no one held accountable. When parts of the investigative file were made public at the request of the family's attorney, another troubling detail emerged: a neighbor living near the trail to the lighthouse had told police he heard an engine starting around 3 a.m. But when he looked outside, he saw no headlights on the only road leading back to town. Investigators had originally dismissed the account as a mistake, assuming the man had misheard wind and waves during the stormy night. Yet when they reviewed traffic cameras along the only road out of the area for the window between 24 a.m., they confirmed no vehicles had traveled the route during that time. This validated that the engine noise was real, suggesting a vehicle left the parking area but did not use the main road. A new theory emerged: if a small vehicle, such as a pickup truck or speedboat, picked up someone or the friends themselves from the parking lot, it would make sense that it avoided the main road and left no trace on traffic cameras. They could have been forced into a different vehicle and spirited away during the storm, without leaving any sign behind, but there was no concrete evidence to identify who was responsible or why. Each fragment of information felt like a haunting puzzle piece, intensifying the family's conviction that their children hadn't simply been lost to nature, but taken by human hands. Outrage peaked as community members demanded answers for why property records around the area were never checked, nor abandoned coastal sites properly investigated, once silent out of exhaustion. The families united to formally petition authorities for full disclosure of the case files and a reopened investigation. Mounting public pressure forced local officials to call a press conference to try to calm the storm. At the briefing, the chief inspector admitted mistakes had been made in documenting the original crime scene, but insisted there was no evidence of intentional negligence by law enforcement. The statement did little to soothe the rage that had been festering for decades. Outside the police station, supporters raised photos of the 4 missing friends high above their heads, chanting for justice. Many wept as they described sleepless nights, the endless uncertainty of whether their children were alive or dead, and the horror of imagining what they might have endured in the dark shadow of the lighthouse, in a last effort before the case risked going cold again. The new investigative team interviewed elderly fishermen who had worked near Greenwater on the night of July 15 and 16, 1995. They heard accounts of a small boat running dark, without lights slipping out to sea just before the storm's heaviest rains began, heading into deep water beyond coastal patrol reach. No one knew who piloted the craft or whether anyone was visible aboard. But the timing matched eerily with the unexplained engine noise from the parking lot, though not enough to accuse anyone. The testimony reinforced a chilling possibility the friends had been taken from the beach by water, not lost to the storm. As the investigation once again teetered on collapse for lack of new physical evidence, the community's faith in justice was shaken to its core. Confidence in safety for young people of color on seemingly innocent trips eroded, leaving a lingering fear that would haunt generations. At night, the Greenwater Lighthouse still loomed, its paint peeling and stairs rusting, a silent monument to the 4 children who vanished into the fog and to the suspicions that would forever shadow their memory, and the community still desperate for answers. Nearly 3 decades have passed, yet even without any definitive new leads, the families and community have never stopped hoping that one day the truth will come to light. Every year, on the night of July 15th, loved ones and friends of Jamal, Keisha, Deshawn, and Latoya gather beneath the Greenwater Lighthouse, lining hundreds of candles from the base of its spiral staircase down to the sands below in the thin mist. The flickering lights seem like the faint, fragile breath of memories, a reminder that 4 young souls once stood here, leaving behind laughter and promises of a future they never got to fulfill at each memorial. Relatives share stories of those first desperate days of searching, of hopes battered by baseless rumors. They recall the moment they found the final photograph, the fear when the mysterious figure emerged from the fog, the heartbreak of seeing Keisha's torn jacket appear in a place no one could explain. Many have grown old waiting, hair turned silver while keeping their children's rooms exactly as they were, as if they might walk back through the door at any moment. For them, time has not softened the pain, it has only stretched the waiting into a permanent part of their lives. The lighthouse's silence has become a symbol of dread in that space where the sea meets the sky. Something happened powerful enough to erase 4 lives without leaving bodies or answers. Those who grew up in Atlanta in the 90s still whisper the story to their children and grandchildren not to sow fear, but to remind them that safety for young Black men and women venturing into remote places has never been guaranteed, not because of nature, but because darkness can hide among people themselves in an effort to bring closure. In 2025, the families of the 4 victims came together to erect a modest memorial stone at the base of the lighthouse. The gray granite slab bears the full names of Jamal, Keisha, Deshawn, and Latoya, along with the inscription, "Vanished in the fog, never forgotten." The dedication ceremony was quiet, with no grand speeches, just the presence of family, friends, and strangers who had never known them but felt compelled by their story to stand in solidarity. They gathered silently by the ocean's edge. Knowing the stone did not just mark loss, it proclaimed that these young people deserved to be remembered with dignity. In small articles about the ceremony, a young journalist wrote, "Sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or case files. It comes from memories kept alive, from eyes that refuse to look away when speaking of the lost. True justice begins when we refuse to let them vanish a second time into silence." The piece spread across social media, drawing thousands of comments from people sharing stories of missing loved ones whose cases, too, had faded over time. From then on, the Greenwater Lighthouse case became a symbol of the yearning to be seen and remembered, of a refusal to let pain be erased because of skin color or humble origins. The families and community began organizing small workshops in schools, telling this story as part of education about safety and the importance of never abandoning missing persons. They described how Jamal loved nature. Keisha saw the world in colors. Deshawn stood steadfast. Latoya radiated warmth, and how the worth of a life is measured not by fame, but by the love it leaves behind. Though the legal file sits undisturbed in the police archives, technically never closed, everyone understands the answers may forever lie buried with the waves or locked in the memory of whoever took the 4 young people from that stormy shore. But for the families, The journey to uncover the truth was never only about assigning blame. It was about affirming that their children once lived, dreamed, loved, and that no one has the right to erase the value of those short, beautiful years. When night falls on the Greenwater Lighthouse, the crash of waves still echoes. The wind moans through the rusted spiral stairwell, as if whispering secrets yet untold. Many believe the four friends remain somewhere between the sea and the sky, not lost, not forgotten, but waiting for the day the truth is revealed. Some say if you stand in the thickest fog, listening closely, you can hear distant laughter, hurried calls like four young souls still chasing each other around the lighthouse. And so the final question still reverberates in every heart. What boundary did they cross that rainy night? The edge of nature's wrath, the threshold of darkness, or the line of a secret kept for nearly 30 years? Perhaps there will never be an answer, but their story has been told, written into memory, so that no one can ever make them disappear again.